قد أفلح من صلى على محمد وآل محمد. Inshallah, for those listening online, and for those in the audience, we will be reciting the 89th chapter of the Holy Quran, Surah Al-Fajr. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والفجر وليال عشر والشفع والوتر والليل إذا يسر هل في ذلك قسم لذي حجر ألم تر كيف فعل ربك بعاد إرم ذات العماد التي لم يخلق مثلها في البلاد وثمود الذين جابوا الصخر بالواد وفرعون ذي الأوتاد الذين طغوا في البلاد فأكثروا فيها الفساد فصب عليهم ربك صوت عذاب إن ربك لبالمرصاد فأما الإنسان إذا ما ابتلاه ربه فأكرمه ونعمه فيقول ربي أكرمن وأما إذا ما ابتلاه فقدر عليه رزقه فيقول ربي أهانن كلا بل لا تكرمون اليتيم ولا تحاضون على طعام المسكين وتأكلون التراث أكلا لما وتحبون المال حبا جما كلا إذا دكت الأرض دكا دكا وجاء ربك والملك صفا صفا وجيء يومئذ بجهنم يومئذ يتذكر الإنسان وأنى له الذكرى يقول يا ليتني قدمت لحياتي فيومئذ لا يعذب عذابه أحد ولا يوثق وثاقه أحد يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية فادخلي في عبادي وادخلي جنتي. صدق الله العلي العظيم. الفاتحة بعد صلوات على محمد وآل محمد.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum, brothers, sisters, respected scholars. Whether you are joining us physically or virtually, we welcome you all to our 2020 Muharram program. I would like to first thank Brother Anwar Mahmood for his beautiful Quran recitation. Look forward to more of those throughout these nights, inshallah. So this is the English portion of the ICA Muharram's program, which will begin at 7:30 p.m. each night. As we did today, we will be starting with a Quran recitation, followed by our lecture with Sheikh Abdulrahman Chirri. We have the privilege of hosting him and learning from him, inshallah, during these nights. And after him will be our English majlis with Brother Yunus Mekki, inshallah, and that will finish the program just before Maghrib and Isha prayers. Then after Maghrib and Isha will be the Arabic program, which will begin at 9:30 p.m., inshallah. If you would like to sponsor any of our nightly programs on behalf of a loved one who has passed away, please feel free to email us at unitednetworkofislam@gmail.com. And for those of you who do not know, or are not familiar with, I should say, with Sheikh Abdulrahman Chirri, he is actually not too different from us. Although he was born in Ohio, he was raised here in Dearborn. He received his bachelor's degree in liberal arts with a focus on economics, right here, just at U of M Dearborn. He then would move on to study to his Hausa studies in Qom, where he has been the last 5 years, while simultaneously receiving his PhD in Germany. And we are honored to have him here now with us. It is a privilege to be able to learn from you during these nights, and inshallah we will be able to all benefit from them. Tonight his topic is the armies of vice and virtue. So without further ado, please help me welcome Sheikh Abdulrahman Chirri with a loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وصلى على محمد وآل محمد. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. God says in His Holy Quran, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وَلَقَدْ ضَرَبْنَا لِلنَّاسِ فِي هَذَا الْقُرْآنِ مِنْ كُلِّ مَثَلٍ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَذَكَّرُونَ. And indeed, we have set forth for mankind in this Quran every kind of parable that haply they may remember. The Quran is a central book in the Islamic religion. It's central both on terms of creedal issues, meaning issues of belief, and issues of action as well. And throughout the following nights, I'm going to be discussing a hadith that has been narrated by one of our holy Imams alayhum salam, related to something we could consider as the application of Quranic teachings. So basically, if a verse comes and indicates a kind of truth for us, the Imam comes and he expands that truth. He unveils its secrets, and he allows us to delve in deeply to its teachings and delve into the continuous and everlasting meanings that the Quran is trying to give us. Because the Quran as a book, in its own nature, we describe it as the words of God. And it's true that this book was revealed at a certain time. And it's true that this book also came down in a specific language. And it's also true that language is limited. Just like a painting. If you have a painting and you look at it, it's a frozen picture. It's a frozen frame. It doesn't change. So the painting itself doesn't change. But the interpretation of that painting, the truths that we can take from that painting, are continuous. But you need someone who is able to understand the painter in order to have the true meanings of what the painter intended conveyed to us. Because you can have someone who believes in complete subjectivity, and he looks at a painting and he says that it's not important what the painter intended with this. What's important is what I understand from it. What's important is what I feel is being described in this painting. And this is what modern art and postmodern art is really all about. But in reality, we are concerned with what the painter intended. and what the author of the Quran intended. Because we believe that what is spoken in the book and what is informed to us and what is told to us is in fact in an everlasting reality, because God himself isn't frozen. God himself isn't an entity that remains frozen and doesn't have any life in him. God is an entity that is ever flowing. God talks about himself in the Quran by saying, وَكُلُّ يَوْمٍ هُوَ فِي شَأْنٍ. Every day is a little translation, but really what it means is every moment. He's in a different state. It's everlasting, ever continuous, and it doesn't stop at one point. So what the Imams did is they took this painting, this Quran, this book, and allowed it to become dynamic in our lives, allowed it to teach us what has been hidden from us and what has been hidden from by the surface. So when we come to religion and we look at the Quran, we notice that the Quran speaks in parables. And the verse that I just quoted, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and indeed we have set forth for mankind in this Quran every kind of parable, that haply they may remember. So there's something that God did, and there's a reason why he did it. And the reason is explicitly mentioned in the verse. He said that we've mentioned parables. Well, why would he mention parables? Why wouldn't he speak to us in a philosophical language? Why doesn't he just tell us things as they are without using metaphors, without using parables, without using stories, for example? The Quran is replete with stories. And not just one story or two, many different stories, and even the same stories repeated. Now, we know the Quran is a limited book. It's composed of 600 pages in its modern Arabic version. And in this book, if we are to say that this is God's speech and it's supposed to teach us about life and our goals in life, then everything should be inside of it. But it is a really compact book for something that teaches itself or claims to be teaching us about life. So what happens is the Quran tells us what its objective is. And if we listen to it and allow it to speak to us, we would understand why the size is not so large and why the content is the way it is. The Quran claims that it's a book of guidance. It doesn't claim that it's a book of science. It doesn't claim that it's a book of literature, although it did use literary forms in its style. It doesn't claim that it's an encyclopedia. It doesn't claim a lot of things, even though us as human beings expect it to be all of that. But it's not. It never said that this is what it is. It says that this is a book of guidance. And what religion is really concerned with is the internal state of mankind. Things on the outside change and move and alter, and they're never stable. Human societies come and go. Human civilizations come and go. But the internal state of mankind has always been the same. If we go back to books thousands of years ago, if we look at Greek philosophy, we're familiar with what they're saying. They talk about ethics, the ethics of Aristotle or Plato. They're still being discussed and taught at universities. They're as relevant back then as today as they were back then. Why? Because the internal state of mankind is a stable state. It doesn't change. It doesn't alter. We go through the same emotions. When somebody is going through difficulties, we are able to understand their difficulties because it's as if we have experienced the same difficulty as well. People who have relationship problems. It's been since the time of, let's say, Adam maybe. There's been issues like that. So the internal state is constant. And if you're able to maintain a stability inside of your heart, then whatever happens on the outside of yourself doesn't really matter. The outside changes all the time. But what matters is that the inside is able to handle and tolerate those changes on the outside. So the Quran uses stories, and it uses metaphors, and it uses different kinds of styles and methods to get its message across. The Quran is not a book of philosophy. Philosophy is very dry. You got abstract notions. You talk about God as a first cause, or you talk about him as this notion in the mind or a concept. But in religion, God becomes alive. God becomes someone who speaks to humankind. God becomes someone who is involved in our daily lives. God is involved with everything that's happening around us, and he's aware of it. When he talks to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Prophet is in a state of sadness, God tells him that I'm looking at you when you're looking at the skies in a state of sadness. So God is aware of human emotions, whereas the God of philosophy is not really involved with emotions. He's abstract. Emotions are a human experience. But in the Quran, God becomes alive. And God presents the world in a way that human beings can relate to it. And not just that, He even creates a literary form for us. He says that there's always this dichotomy, this battle between two things. There's the battle between good and evil, the battle between light and darkness, the battle between internal imprisonment and freedom, the battle between God and shaitan, Satan. So this dichotomy is always there. There's this constant struggle, constant fight, constant tug of war in a way between these two things. And the reason why it's presented this way is because it's a mover. If you always think that you're fighting against something or you're struggling against something, then this is allowing you to imagine or give reality to your enemy and give some sort of existence to what you're resisting. And thus it becomes more lively in your life and in your daily decisions and your daily behavior. Whereas if you come and define evil as the absence of good, then you're not really motivated to go and confront evil, because it just kills it. It doesn't have life anymore. Evil is non-existent anyways. But in the Quran, God talks about darkness and evil as something that exists. And it's because the Quran is not concerned about evil philosophically speaking or metaphysically. What is it defined as? The Quran wants evil to exist in the human mind. Because if you look at theaters, for example, if you look at movies, they bring the force of darkness and he becomes a character. Even though the force of darkness should be non-existent. It's the absence of light. But they give it a character. It gives evil a character. It gives non-existent thing characters, because when humans watch this, they're able to relate to it, and thus they're able to change, and they become motivated, and they start wanting to change in their lives. That's why movies are very effective. Theater is very effective. One thing that has been moving mankind for all of our known history is the arts. Acting, the theater or movies, the cinema. Music is a very, very strong factor and influencer on human life. Why is it so? It's not that music is an evil thing and Satan is overtaking humans by spreading music around. Now, we can discuss whether some music is good or some music is bad. But one thing we can all agree on is that music in itself is a strong mover of the human soul. Poetry is something that the soul is able to connect with. That's why in Muharram we have eulogies as well. And it's poetry. Why isn't it just spoken word? Well, there's something in poetry. There's a rhythm. The soul itself is musical. So when it hears something musical, when it hears something that has a rhythm to it, it connects to it. And this is what the Quran wants. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants. He wants to get to that soul. And in order to get to it, He uses this specific method. So for the next nights that we're going to spend here, inshallah, and I thank you for having me, and I thank you for attending and for listening. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the tawfiq and success to be able to benefit from these holy nights and these sacred nights, even though we're in a situation that we might have not experienced ever before. But inshallah, we won't have that or allow it to affect us. There's a famous hadith by Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam, found in a book titled Al-Kafi. Al-Kafi is one of the main sources of Shia hadith, and it contains hadith on belief, creed, and it contains a hadith on fiqh, which is jurisprudence and practice, like worship, prayers, fasting, hajj, and whatnot. In the first chapter, titled the chapter of the intellect and ignorance, or Kitab al-Aql, the Imams alayhum salam talk about what the aql is. Because in the Quran, we have a lot of verses where God asks you, أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ? Do you not comprehend? Do you not think? So the Imams come and take this, and they expand upon it. and they give us the deeper teachings of this verse. So God will say, أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ? Do you not think, or do you not comprehend, or do you not use your minds? And what the Imam does is he takes that, and it's like he decrypts it. That's like an encrypted statement, and the Imam comes and he decrypts it. So what the Imam does here is he presents us with a hadith, and a very long one, and he presents the scene as if it's a battlefield. He presents the human being as a living entity that has an internal struggle, an internal battlefield occurring inside of him. And the Imam gives it this scenery and this life. It begins by saying that the Imam, alayhi salam, or there is one of the Imam's companions, Sama'a. He says the following. Or before I go into that, let me explain the scene for you guys. The setting inside the human being is the battlefield. It's a battlefield. The scene is the soul of the human being. And the circumstance is war. There's a battle going on, and the person, as soon as the Imam begins to describe this, you can start picturing it in your mind. That inside of yourself you have this war going on. It's a battlefield. And in a battlefield, you have armies. You have opposing armies, usually made up of two. The main characters in this are the aql, the intellect, and jahl, which is ignorance or foolishness. So these are the two main characters. The heads of the two armies. The intellect is fighting with ignorance and foolishness. The principal warriors, you have goodness on the intellect side, the vizier of al-aql, and you have the evil, which is on the foolishness side or the ignorance side, and it's the vizier of al-jahl. And each army has 75 warriors. Sama'a said, I was in the presence of Imam Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam, with a gathering of his followers. So they were sitting down in a circle, probably in a room, and the companions of the Imams, this is how the Imams taught them. They would tell them to sit down and to discuss things. A lot of the times the Imam would not give them answers directly because he wanted to encourage this form of debate and discussion and dialogue, even between his companions. Even though the Imam knows that his knowledge comes from God or from the Messenger of God, what he wanted for the community is that the community become something elevated, that the community have knowledge in themselves, and not to be mere followers or mere listeners and people who just obey without thinking. So it's very natural in a hadith that you see Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam entering a room and the companions are having a discussion by themselves. And in some hadith, you see that the Imam comes in while they're discussing, and once they finish, they ask the Imam, what do you think about this topic? And the Imam, or sometimes we have that the Imam is sitting down and he tells each and one of his followers to give their opinion on a specific topic, and then the Imam would comment on each and every opinion. He would say that you did good over here, but your weakness in your argument was over there. You did good here, and your weakness was there. You did better on that side, he did better on that side. So this was very common. So Sama'a says that he was in the presence of Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam in a gathering of his followers. And as they were sitting down, a discussion on intelligence and ignorance arose. So they were talking about something, and suddenly this discussion came up. Thereupon Imam Abu Abdullah alayhi salam said, he's talking to his companions. He tells them, know intellect and its army, and ignorance and its army, and you shall attain guidance. The Imam began with a very general statement here. And you can imagine everybody sitting down wondering, we've never heard about this. What is the intellect and its army? What is he referring to? So immediately the Imam aroused their curiosity. He gave them a scene immediately to imagine, and their imagination begins to work. The imagination faculty in a human being is very strong. Humans are able to imagine stuff. Well, most of the things in our life, we're affected by them because of our imagination. If we imagine something fearful, even though it doesn't exist, we're scared of it. Fear begins building up inside of us, just because of our imagination. So the Imam begins with this. He tells them to know the intellect in his army and ignorance in his army, and you shall attain guidance. So Sama'a says, I then said, may I be your ransom? And this is the common way they would address the Imam. we know nothing but what you have taught us. So basically he's saying, we've never heard of this before, and we've never heard it from you before either. So Imam Sadiq alayhi salam says, God, may he be glorified and exalted, created aql first among the spiritual entities. So there's spiritual entities, and the first of those creations was al-aql. Just like the Quran says the first of the physical creations was Adam, in the spiritual world, al-aql was the first of creations. He drew it forth from the right of his throne. Again, it's not literal here, but it's metaphorical and it's symbolic. He drew it forth from the right of his throne, making it proceed from his own light. So we have divine light, and we have the aql emanating or coming from that light. So now we know that the aql is a spiritual, luminous entity. He then commanded it to retreat, and it retreated. And to advance, and it advanced. And then God proclaimed, I created you glorious, and I gave you preeminence over all my creatures. He gave aql the highest status among all creatures. Then ignorance was created. So first the aql was created, and ignorance came second. Again, giving ignorance life, giving it existence. It's not the absence of knowledge. Ignorance in this hadith exists. It's an entity. It was created. And ignorance, seeing its pride and its hesitation in approaching God, he damned it. And he said, then from the briny ocean, God created dark ignorance. This is the continuation of the hadith. So he created it from darkness. The aql was from light, and jahl, ignorance, is from darkness. He ordered it to retreat, and it retreated. To advance, and it did not advance. So it took a step back. Now you have aql. It moved and it came back, whereas ignorance refused, and it stayed behind. Then God said to it, certainly you have grown proud. God describes this as pride in it. I told you to come back, and you didn't come back. So certainly you have grown proud. And he damned it and chased it from his presence. Aql and ignorance then see themselves endowed with 75 armies. He gave 75 to aql, and he gave 75 to jahl, that are respectively the same number of moral and spiritual qualities and defects. So the aql was given 75 armies, and God gave jahl 75 as well. What we're going to do in the next few nights, inshallah, is we're going to select a few of these armies and speak about them. And I'm going to give an example of a few, and then we can end for tonight, inshallah, so we can continue tomorrow. Among the 75 units, he gave the intellect was goodness. So goodness was the first soldier or vizier he gave intellect. And it was the vizier of the intellect. He made evil its rival, and it was the vizier of foolishness, jahl. And among them was belief, and its rival was unbelief. And among them was hope, and its rival was despair. And among them was justice, and its rival was injustice, iniquity. And among them, and among them, and among them, until he enumerates 75. And then the Imam says, no one other than a prophet or his successor or a true believer, the strength of whose faith in Allah has already been tested, can have the whole army of intelligence with all such characteristics. So the objective of the human being is to have all these soldiers inside of himself defeat the forces of ignorance inside of him. But the Imam is saying that no one except the prophet or an Imam or a believer who has been truly tested by God and that he succeeded in this test is able to conquer the army of the enemy completely. The Imam then says, as for the rest of our followers, each of them, without exception, possesses some of these units of intellect until he perfects himself and rids himself of the units of ignorance. At that point, he will be at the highest station with the prophets and their successors. This perfection can only be attained by knowing the intellect and its army and distancing oneself from ignorance and its army. May Allah grant you and us success to obey Him and please Him. And the Imam begins with that. He begins this initiation to know these. And in order for you to perfect yourself spiritually and live a stable life, not just spiritually, mentally as well, you have to be able to defeat those armies of ignorance. And this is something, whether you're a believer in God or not, it's a human state. Things like hope, things like despair, things like sadness, things like joy. These are all emotions that we experience. And the Imam here describes how to overcome. Like accepting God's decree is one of the armies of intellect. This, for example, if you run into a relationship problem in your life, and you've tried your best to fix it, and it doesn't get fixed, and there's no way, whatever you do, nothing is improving. In this sense, you just have to accept that life is this way, and you have to move on. A lot of people have a difficulty doing that. A lot of people remain drawn into that, and they're overcome with sadness, overcome with problems. So this is one of the armies of evil and ignorance, one of the soldiers that overtake the human being because of a weakness in his soul. So this could be applied not just for those who believe in God, but also because it's a human state that the Imam is describing. So inshallah, we're going to select a number of these, and we're going to discuss them night after night, inshallah. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Imam al-Hussein ibn Ali alayhi salam once said, "There is no slave of Allah who sheds tears and his eyes become wet, except that Allah will put him in paradise for a lengthy period." Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله. صلى الله عليك وعلى ابنك الحسين المظلوم. يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة، ويا باب نجاة هذه الأمة. يا ليتنا ثم يا ليتنا كنا معكم سادتي، فنفوز والله فوزا عظيما. يقول الشيخ محمد سعيد منصوري: أرخست يا شهر المحرم أدمعي، أرخست يا شهر المحرم أدمعي، ونزعتها من قلبي المتفجع، وتركتني والحزن ملء جوانحي، سهران من حر الأسى لم أهجعي. May my tears forever flow from my birth and as I grow. Tonight we begin the commemoration of the first days of Muharram, the start of a new Islamic year. However, we do not greet it with joyous celebration. Our hearts are filled with sadness and grief because we remember those martyrs who were killed in Karbala, Iraq. For the coming days and nights, as in every day and night of our lives, we hold Majalis Aza al-Imam al-Hussein to mourn the death of Imam al-Hussein, the divine guide and the third successor of Prophet Muhammad, his family and companions. These majalis are gatherings for the mourning of Imam al-Hussein and the tragedy that befell him. It's only through this mourning that our spirits mend for the ability to live like those who gave their lives on the path of Imam al-Hussein. It's through this mourning that Imam al-Hussein's principles are ingrained within us in such a way that it is present at our highest and lowest points of our lives. This ingraining that is brought about by our mourning of Imam al-Hussein makes its greatest presence in the hereafter. In these majalis of Muharram, we recall the events of the martyrdom of Imam al-Hussein, his family and companions, and the hardship and suffering of those in his family who survived the tragedy of Karbala. The first morning gatherings after the martyrdom of Imam al-Hussein were initiated by his sister Zainab al-Kubra. As soon as they were set free by Yazid, the ruler of the time. Since then, we have continued to hold these gatherings despite all opposition. In these majalis, we honor the sacrifice of Imam al-Hussein and his companions, pledging to hold fast by their legacy. We gather to console Fatima az-Zahra on her son's martyrdom, to feel her pain, for we were created for her love. It's our perfection. Fatima az-Zahra attends these majalis. Though we cannot see her, she prays for us and for our family's safety. She collects our tears when we cry for Imam al-Hussein and his family. On the day of judgment, she will return all those tears we have shed for her family. These tears will protect us from hellfire. I would like us to think about what I have just said. Let us examine our deeds and see if they are befitting for us to face Sayyidah Fatima on the day of judgment. What does she think when she looks at our faces in these gatherings? If we are not carrying ourselves with high character, adhering to our prayers that remind us of the reality of this transient world, and holding our parents with great regard, the love for the Imam is most manifest in our following of him, and our dissociation from the Imam's enemies is most manifest in our disavowing of their acts in our very own character. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself has vowed to keep these mourning rites or sha'air alive. We are honored to be a means by which this is done. With that, we recall some of the tragedies that took place in the lives of the Ahlul Bayt, Prophet Muhammad's household. On the first of Muharram, Imam al-Hussein's caravan, made up of his family, women, children, and his companions, had just reached outside of the area of Karbala in Iraq. They pitched their tents for the night. The poet Nuri Sardal writes, The day rises, yet watches the night fall. The day rises, yet watches the nights fall. And to tormented hearts would this night fall. As Muharram begins with the night fall, as the hearts that love him welcome their torture. Historians report that Imam al-Hussein and his sister Zainab al-Kubra stood outside. They stood together outside of Imam al-Hussein's tent. Together they both sighted the crescent of the first of Muharram. Tears flowed from Imam al-Hussein's eyes. The writer Liaq al-Dawji pictures that Sayyida Zainab grew worried and asked her brother, "My dearest brother Hussein, why are these tears in your eyes?" Imam al-Hussein replies, "Zainab, my sister Zainab, please pray for me that I keep my promise to Allah. Pray, my sister, that I succeed in completing my mission to save Islam. Zainab, pray for me that I do not hesitate in giving up my life for Islam." Imam al-Hussein was not crying because he was worried about dying. Imam al-Hussein did not ask his sister Zainab to pray to Allah to save his life. All he was concerned about was Islam, God's religion, the godly way of life. Sayyida Zainab's eyes were filled with tears when she heard what Imam al-Hussein asked her to do. "My beloved sister Zainab, don't cry. You will have to perform a greater duty after my death. Be brave and patient." Sayyida Zainab went to her tent. It's reported that as the caravan had traveled, Ali al-Akbar rode near Imam al-Hussein. The Imam told him, "My son, Ali al-Akbar, I had a dream, I had a vision. I saw a group of people heading for a place where death was waiting for them. I saw them all killed one by one." Ali al-Akbar says, "Father, I know these people. Those people are us. But tell me, Father, are we on the right path?" "Yes, my son, Ali al-Akbar. Yes, we are on the right path." "Then let us not worry, Father. If we are on the right path, then let us die happily. We should continue our journey and greet our death with a smile." I ask that you all recite with me. بايعناك يا إمامي أنت والينا في كربلاء يا حسين أنت هادينا. بايعناك يا إمامي أنت والينا في كربلاء يا حسين أنت هادينا. بايعناك يا إمامي أنت والينا في كربلاء يا حسين أنت هادينا. Our guide, our pride, Master Hussein. Our love by your side, Master Hussein. Our guide, our pride, Master Hussein. Our love by your side, Master Hussein. بايعناك يا إمامي أنت والينا في كربلاء يا حسين أنت هادينا. بايعناك يا إمامي أنت والينا في كربلاء يا حسين أنت هادينا. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. To Allah we belong, and to Him we shall return. Peace be with you, O Imam al-Hussein. Peace be with you, O Ali, son of Imam al-Hussein. Peace be with you, O companions of Imam al-Hussein. Peace be with you, O sons of Imam al-Hussein. Forever, as long as day and night continue in their alterations. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. For the hastening of the reappearance of the Imam of our time, Imam Muhammad al-Mahdi, for the protection of our maraji', for all of the lovers of the Ahl al-Bayt, their living and their deceased, kindly recite a Surah al-Fatiha with a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Thank you so much, Brother Yunus. That concludes our program for tonight. We'll see you all, inshallah, tomorrow at 7:30 sharp. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli.